The last stand. The city was broken. Once tall towers now lay in dust and smoke rose into the dark sky. The streets were silent except for the sound of distant guns. Every corner was filled with ruins. Every wall carried scars of battle. The defenders were tired, their faces covered with ash and fear. For weeks the enemy had pushed them back. They were not fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting only to live one more day. Food was gone. Water was running low. Medicine had vanished. Even hope was almost dead. The commander, an old alien with silver skin, stood on the wall of the last stronghold. His soldiers were a mix of different species, broken survivors of many colonies. Their armor was scratched, their weapons weak. Still, they stood beside him because there was nowhere left to run. Every night, someone asked the same question, "Will anyone come to help us?" And every night, the commander gave the same answer, "No, no one is coming." Once, there had been rumors, whispers of a human warship that roamed this sector, powerful and fast, feared by enemies and loved by allies. But that was long ago. Months had passed and no ship had come. The defenders had sent message after message into the stars, but silence was their only answer. Now the enemy was ready for the final strike. From the hills outside the city, massive machines were rolling forward. Their black armor shone with firelight. In the sky above, enemy warships circled like vultures waiting for the kill. Inside the stronghold, soldiers checked their weapons. Some whispered prayers. Some looked at old pictures of their families. A young fighter, no more than 16, asked the commander, "Is this the end?" The old commander looked at him, his eyes heavy with sorrow. "Yes," he said quietly, "but we will make them pay for every step." The defenders prepared for their last stand. Then something strange happened. At first, it was only a sound, faint, almost like static in a broken radio. A soldier working on the comms device lifted his head. "Commander, I hear something." The others gathered around. For a moment, everyone was silent. Then it came again, a broken signal, like a voice trapped behind walls of distance. No words could be understood, only a deep echo that shook the air. The commander frowned. "Is it the enemy?" The soldier shook his head. "No, it feels different, stronger, but I cannot lock it." Hope flickered for the first time in weeks, but no one dared to believe. Too many times they had prayed for help, only to be met with nothing. The night grew darker. The enemy began to move closer. Massive shadows marched toward the stronghold, their steps shaking the ground. The defenders braced themselves. Cannons pointed to the walls, preparing to tear down the last gate. The commander raised his sword. "Hold the line!" The battle began. Explosions ripped through the air, lighting the night with fire. The defenders shot from the walls, their weapons weak but their hearts fierce. The enemy advanced without fear, pouring across the ruins like a wave of death. Screams filled the city. Dust and blood covered the streets. The young fighter who had asked about the end fired until his gun broke, then picked up another. His hands trembled, but he refused to stop. The commander shouted orders, his voice hoarse but steady. Still, he knew it was not enough. For every enemy they killed, 10 more took its place. Then the sound returned. Louder this time. A low vibration that came not from the city but from the sky itself. The ground shook. The air trembled. Every soldier stopped for a second. Even the enemy paused, turning their heads upward. The black sky seemed to shift, as if something massive was hiding in the void. "What is that?" whispered the young fighter. The commander's heart pounded. He had heard stories long ago. Stories of engines that roared like thunder, of ships that carried the strength of storms. Ships that belonged to humanity. But it could not be true. It was only a legend. A dream. The sound grew louder, like a howl, breaking through the silence of the universe. The defenders looked up, their eyes wide. For the first time in many nights, their hearts filled with something they had forgotten. Hope. The enemy aimed their weapons at the sky, nervous now, unsure of what was coming. The commander raised his sword once more. His voice shook, but not with fear, with belief. "Hold the line," he shouted again. "Hold the line, for something is coming." And in that moment, every man, woman, and child in the city felt it too. The void was no longer silent. Something was coming. Something human. Whispers in the void. The night after the battle was not quiet. Fires burned across the ruins, and the air was filled with smoke and the smell of metal. The defenders buried their dead in silence. Every face was tired, but every ear was still waiting for that sound, the deep howl from the sky. The commander sat alone on the broken wall. His armor was cracked, his sword heavy. He looked up at the stars, searching for movement. He had heard it. They had all heard it. The strange roar that shook the sky. But no ship had appeared, no figure had come to their aid. "Maybe it was only thunder," whispered one soldier. "No," another replied quickly. "Thunder does not come from the void." Rumors spread fast among the survivors. Some said the humans had returned, hidden behind the stars, watching them. Others said it was a ghost ship, the last memory of a war long past. A few believed it was nothing at all, just the dying mind of a desperate city. But deep inside, every soul felt the same thing. It was real. Something was out there. In the underground shelter, the young fighter who had asked about the end now asked a new question. "Commander, if it was the humans, why didn't they show themselves?" The commander looked at him. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Because humans do not arrive early. They arrive when the enemy thinks victory is certain." The boy frowned. But why would they wait? The commander's eyes narrowed as he stared into the dark. Because fear is a weapon, and no one uses it like humans. The words spread like wildfire. Soon soldiers whispered in corners, speaking of human warships that once turned entire fleets to dust. They remembered old tales told by travelers. Humans who fought not for conquest but for survival. Humans who howled into battle with fire and steel. The defenders began to wonder, if the sound was real, then maybe salvation was not lost. But the enemy also heard it. And they were afraid. In the enemy's war camp, the generals argued, their scanners had picked up a signal too large, too strong to be simple static. One officer demanded retreat. Another laughed and called it a trick. But even as they argued, their soldiers whispered the same word in fear: humans. For centuries, the enemy had fought many species. They had crushed them, enslaved them, destroyed their worlds. But the humans were different. They were dangerous, not because of their weapons, but because of their will. Even when outnumbered, even when dying, they never stopped. The thought of a human warship in the system was enough to shake their courage. Back in the ruined city, the defenders could feel the tension in the air. The enemy attacks slowed. Patrols seemed nervous. It was as if the howl from the void had wounded their spirit. The young fighter noticed it first. He saw enemy troops hesitating at the edges of the battlefield, scanning the skies before advancing. He rushed to the commander with excitement. "They're afraid. The sound pounded broke them." The commander placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Fear can break, yes, but it can also make them dangerous. A cornered beast will bite hardest." The defenders knew the enemy was preparing something bigger, something final. Yet even as fear grew, a different fire burned in their hearts. They began to believe again. That night, the signal returned, stronger this time. A deep hum rolled across the sky, shaking the broken walls and rattling loose stones. The defenders ran outside, staring upward with wide eyes. The stars seemed to ripple. Space itself felt alive, as if something massive was moving just beyond sight. The calm soldier screamed with joy. "It's not static. It's a ship. The signal is human." For a moment the city erupted with cheers, but the commander raised his hand, silencing them. His voice was firm. "Do not celebrate yet. If they are coming, they will bring both hope and war is never kind." The defenders waited, hearts racing. The sound faded again, leaving only silence behind, but silence was no longer empty. Silence now meant something was on the way. The commander turned to his soldiers. "Listen well. When humans come, they do not knock at the door. They break it. And when they break it, the stars themselves will shake. The boy looked up at the sky, his eyes filled with wonder. Then let the stars shake, he whispered. In the hills outside the city, the enemy prepared their next move. Thousands of war machines lined up, their guns glowing with deadly light. Their commanders shouted orders, desperate to crush the defenders before the humans arrived. The defenders tightened their grip on their weapons. The comm soldier kept listening to the faint signal, and the commander stood tall on the wall, staring into the void, for he knew the truth. The howl had not been a dream. It had been a warning, and when the humans came, they would not come quietly. Shadows of destruction. The dawn was not golden, it was black. Clouds of smoke covered the horizon, and the rising sun was hidden behind a wall of fire. The defenders stood on the broken walls of the city, watching the hills beyond. And then they saw it. The enemy was coming. Thousands of machines rolled forward, their metal feet crushing the earth. War beasts built of steel and flame roared as they marched. Tanks with glowing cannons moved in perfect lines, and above them, warships cut across the sky like blades. The sound was terrifying. The ground shook as if the planet itself feared their approach. The commander narrowed his eyes. He knew what this was, the final assault. The enemy wanted to erase the city in one strike, to kill every whisper of resistance before the humans could arrive. He raised his sword. Ready yourselves. They will not take us easily. The defenders loaded their weapons. Some whispered prayers. Others kissed tokens from their families. Even those with broken arms stood with weapons strapped to their shoulders. No one stepped back. Not this time. But in their hearts, fear grew. The enemy was too many, too strong. Could hope alone hold back an army like this? The young fighter clenched his rifle. His voice shook, but his eyes were fierce. Commander, even if they kill us all, we must make them remember. We must show them that we did not break. The commander placed a hand on his shoulder. You speak like a human, he said. The boy smiled faintly. Then maybe that is what they fear. The first blast struck the walls. Stones shattered, dust filled the air, and screams echoed. Enemy cannons fired again and again, tearing holes into the last stronghold. Defenders fired back, but their weapons were too weak. For every enemy machine destroyed, 10 more advanced. The city trembled. Buildings collapsed. Flames rose higher. Still, the defenders did not run. From the hills, the enemy commander watched with cold eyes. His voice growled across the comms. Crush them. Leave nothing alive. Before the humans come, this city must be ash. The machines pushed harder, their weapons pounding the stronghold. The defenders fell back step by step, fighting through rubble, choking on smoke. The boy shot until his rifle burned his hands. The comm soldier shouted warnings as enemy ships circled closer. And then, in the middle of chaos, it happened again. The sound, not from the city, not from the enemy, from the sky. At first it was faint, like the heartbeat of a giant hidden behind the stars. Then it grew. A deep vibration, a howl that rattled stone and bone alike. The defenders froze. Even the enemy paused, turning their heads upward. The roar grew louder, deeper, shaking the very air. It was not thunder. It was not storm. It was something alive, something powerful, something that belonged to legends. The boy's eyes widened. They're here, he whispered. The commander's heart pounded. He had heard stories of this sound, engines that screamed like beasts, tearing through the void. He lifted his sword high. Hold the line! The stars themselves are waking! Above, the battlefield, the black sky rippled. A crack of light split the void as if space itself was being torn apart. Enemy scanners went wild, alarms flashing red. Their commanders shouted in panic, and then silence. The roar stopped. The crack of light closed. The sky was empty again. Confusion filled the battlefield. The defenders stared upward, hope trembling in their hearts. The enemy shaken hesitated in their advance. The comm soldier screamed. I had it! The signal, it was there, it was human, but it vanished. The commander clenched his fist. His voice was heavy. Not vanished. Waiting. Watching, the boy shouted, his voice echoing across the broken streets. If they are watching, then let them see us fight. Let them see we are worth saving. The defenders roared in answer. They fought harder, pushing back wave after wave. For every wall that fell, they built barricades with their bodies. For every street lost, they turned alleys into traps. The enemy was furious now, pouring everything into the assault. The city shook as fire rained down, but the defenders refused to yield, and all the while, the sky above seemed to pulse with unseen power. The enemy general snarled in rage. It is nothing. No ship comes. Kill them all. But doubt had entered his soldiers' hearts. Every time they fired, they glanced upward. Every shadow in the sky made them tremble. For they, too, had heard the howl, and they knew what it meant. The commander stood on the wall, sword in hand, smoke swirling around him. His voice thundered across the city. They thought no aid was coming. They thought we would die forgotten. But the void itself howls with anger, and when the humans answer, this world will burn with their fury, the defenders shouted as one, their voices rising above the fire and destruction, and somewhere beyond the stars, hidden in the darkness, a warship stirred. Its engines whispered. Its weapons glowed. It was waiting. And soon, it would come howling. The howl from the void. The battle had become a storm. Smoke swallowed the city and fire painted the ruins red. The defenders fought like shadows in the dust, their cries lost under the thunder of war. But then the ground changed. It shook. Not from enemy machines, but from something deeper, heavier. The air trembled, carrying a sound that did not belong to this world. At first it was faint, a low hum, like a drumbeat in the chest of the universe. Soldiers on both sides froze. Weapons hung in midair. Even the enemy war beasts paused, their metal limbs stiffening. Then the hum grew. It rolled across the battlefield like a living storm, shaking bones, rattling stones, burning into the heart. The defenders looked up with wide eyes. The young fighter whispered, his voice trembling but full of hope. It's them. It has to be them. The commander lifted his face to the black sky. His old eyes filled with fire. The howl, he said almost reverently. The howl has come. The enemy general barked orders in fury. Ignore it. Fire. Destroy the city before it arrives. But his own soldiers were restless, their hands shaking. They had all heard the stories. Humans did not enter battle quietly. Their ships howled like monsters, ripping silence apart, turning space itself into their ally. And now that sound was here. Above the city, the sky cracked. A ripple tore through the stars as if reality itself was breaking. Light burst across the heavens, sharp and blinding, and for one heartbeat time seemed to stop. The defenders fell silent, staring upward. Then the void screamed. Engines roared with a fury no words could capture. The howl of the warship poured into the world. Not just sound, but a force, a vibration that crawled into the soul. Windows shattered. Enemy machines stumbled. Dust rose in waves. From the tear in the sky, a shape emerged. Massive, armored, terrible in beauty. The human warship. Its hull was black as the void itself, but its engines glowed like fire. Weapons lined its sides, each one large enough to shatter cities. And on its prow was the mark of humanity. A symbol burned into steel, a warning to all who saw it. We are here. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The enemy soldiers trembled. Some dropped their weapons. Others whispered in fear. Their general shouted desperately, "Fire at it! Fire at it now!" Cannons turned upward. Beams of energy shot into the sky, striking the warship's armor. Explosions lit the heavens, but when the light faded, the ship still stood. Untouched. Unbroken. The warship answered. From its sides, fire erupted. Beams of pure destruction cut across the battlefield, slicing enemy machines apart as if they were made of paper. Entire lines of tanks melted under the first strike. Warships in the air turned to ash in seconds. The defenders screamed, not in fear, but in joy. The young fighter dropped to his knees, tears running down his ash-covered face. "They came," he whispered. "The humans came." The commander raised his sword toward the sky, his voice echoing across the ruins. "We are not alone." The human ship's engines roared again, louder, deeper, shaking the stars themselves. With each strike, the battlefield changed. Enemy soldiers broke ranks, machines faltered. The unstoppable tide of destruction was suddenly drowning instead of advancing. But the warship was not only killing, it was speaking. A message crackled through every comm device in the city. The voice was calm, strong, unmistakably human. "Hold the line. Help has arrived." The defenders cried out, their spirits ignited. Even the weakest among them stood taller, their weapons steady. They fought with renewed fury, striking back at the enemy with everything they had. The enemy general's face twisted with rage. His army, once unstoppable, was collapsing. His soldiers were fleeing, his machines torn apart. And above him, that terrible black ship watched like a predator waiting for the kill. "This cannot be," he screamed. "Humans do not come this far. They cannot be here." But they were. The howl of the engines shook the ground again as the warship descended lower, its shadow falling across the battlefield. It was not just a ship, it was a warning, a promise, a declaration that humanity had returned to the stars and they had not forgotten their allies. The commander, standing tall on the shattered wall, spoke to his people. "Remember this moment. The void itself has chosen sides, and it has chosen humanity." The boy lifted his rifle high, his voice breaking into a shout. "For the humans, for our world." The defenders roared with him, their voices rising into the sky. And above them, the human warship howled again, louder than ever, drowning out fire, drowning out fear. The void was no longer silent. It was alive, and it carried the fury of mankind, fury of humanity. The battlefield had become unrecognizable. What only hours ago had been ruins and despair was now a storm of fire and thunder. The human warship did not simply fight, it dominated. Every strike from its weapons tore holes in the enemy lines. Where enemy war beasts had marched with pride, only smoking wrecks remained. Where enemy warships had circled like vultures, the sky was now littered with falling debris. But the warship was not fighting like other fleets. It was fighting like a predator. It moved with precision, each strike chosen, each blast cutting straight to the heart of the enemy. It was as if the ship knew where to hit, as if it had studied this battlefield before arriving. The defenders watched in awe. Soldiers who had been moments from surrender now stood tall, their voices joining in wild cheers. Some dropped to their knees in tears, not because the battle was won, but because for the first time in weeks they believed it could be won. The commander, his silver skin glowing in the firelight, looked at the ship with eyes full of memory. He had heard whispers of humanity's wrath, stories of their relentless survival. But seeing it now was different. Seeing it was terrifying and magnificent. Beside him, the young fighter clutched his rifle so tightly his knuckles turned white. His voice was shaky but filled with awe. "They fight like the void itself is theirs." The commander nodded. "No, they fight as if they are the void." The enemy, once confident, was unraveling. Soldiers broke formation, retreating in panic. Generals shouted in fury, their orders lost in the chaos. War beasts tried to regroup, only to be torn apart by beams of white fire from above. But then the warship did something unexpected. It stopped firing. The battlefield fell into a strange silence, broken only by the crackle of flames and the cries of the wounded. Both defenders and enemies looked up in confusion. The massive ship hovered above them, its weapons glowing but dormant, and then it spoke. A human voice, amplified across the battlefield, filled the air. It was calm, cold, and sharp as steel. "To the enemy forces, you came to this world with arrogance. You thought no one would stop you, but you were wrong. This world is under humanity's protection now. Leave, or be erased." The words carried across every comm channel, across every heart. The defenders cried out in joy, their courage blazing. The enemy soldiers looked to their leaders in fear, their hands trembling. The enemy general roared in defiance. "Do not listen! Fire everything! Bring it down!" Cannons turned upward. Beams of deadly light shot toward the warship. Explosions lit the sky. The defenders gasped in horror. But when the light cleared, the warship still floated. Untouched, unshaken, and then it moved. This time there was no restraint, no precision, no mercy. The warship unleashed everything. Dozens of cannons roared at once, fire streaking through the air like the wrath of a god. The ground shook as enemy lines were obliterated in waves of destruction. Machines exploded into fireballs. Warships were torn apart, their pieces raining down like broken stars. The sound was deafening, a chorus of howls that made the earth itself tremble. It was not a battle anymore, it was judgment. The defenders covered their faces from the blinding light. Some laughed, some cried, some shouted prayers of thanks. The young fighter screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice breaking. "This is humanity. This is their fury." The enemy broke completely. Soldiers threw down their weapons and ran. Machines turned and retreated, their operators desperate to escape. Even the generals lost control, their voices drowned in the storm. But the warship did not chase them all. It struck only where it must, tearing apart the core of the enemy army, leaving the rest to scatter. It fought with fury but also with purpose, and in that fury, the defenders saw something more than power. They saw a choice. The commander whispered to himself, "They are not just saving us. They are warning the galaxy." When the last enemy warship fell, silence returned. Smoke and ash floated in the air. The battlefield was no longer a place of despair. It was a graveyard of the invaders. The warship hovered above the ruins, engines glowing like the breath of a beast. It had howled, it had struck, and it had won, but it was not finished. The human voice returned, steady and unyielding. "To those who stand against us, remember this day. The void is wide, but humanity is watching. And when we come with fury." The defenders erupted into cheers. Tears streamed down their faces. They shouted until their throats burned, their voices echoing through the ruined city. The young fighter fell to his knees, overcome. He looked up at the commander. "We are alive, because of them." The commander placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, we are alive because we endured long enough for them to come, and together, we will endure again." Above them, the warships, engines howled one last time, shaking the heavens. It was not just victory, it was a promise. The turning tide. The smoke had not yet settled. The battlefield was a graveyard of fire and broken steel, the cries of the wounded echoing through shattered streets. But above it all, the human warship still hovered, its engines burning like suns. A shadow of wrath against the stars. The defenders, bloodied but alive, stood in silence, staring at their savior. None dared to speak. None dared to breathe too loudly, as if the moment itself would vanish if they broke it. Then the comms crackled again. A human voice, strong and steady, filled the ruined city. "To the survivors, stand tall. You are not alone. Prepare to fight beside us. Today we end this invasion together." The defenders erupted in cries, their exhaustion burned away by fresh fire. Even the weakest among them gripped their weapons tighter. For the first time they felt not like prey hiding from death, but like warriors standing with giants. The commander raised his sword, his silver skin stained with blood and ash. His voice thundered across the survivors. "You heard them. Humanity fights with us. From this moment we are not victims, we are a storm." The young fighter shouted until his voice cracked. "Side by side with humans," and the storm began. From the warship's belly, smaller crafts dropped into the ruins, sleek machines shaped for war. Human soldiers marched out, their armor black and scarred, their faces hidden behind steel. They moved like shadows, silent and precise, every step carrying the weight of centuries of survival. The defenders watched in awe as the humans spread across the streets, their weapons glowing with strange light. One of them approached the commander, saluted, and spoke through a translator. "Captain Darius of the Vanguard. You held the line. Now we break it." The commander bowed his head, his old eyes shining. "We held because we believed. Now show us how humanity fights." And humanity did. The humans moved with speed and fury, striking the enemy with weapons the defenders had never seen. Rifles spat fire that cut through steel. Blades hummed with energy that shattered enemy armor. Every movement was sharp, every strike decisive. But the defenders did not stay behind. They surged forward, fighting beside their new allies. Their weak rifles suddenly felt stronger, their tired bodies lighter. Standing shoulder to shoulder with humans, they felt invincible. The enemy tried to regroup. Their generals screamed for order, pushing their soldiers back into formation. Massive war beasts lumbered forward once more, their cannons blazing. But the tide had shifted. Human artillery tore the war beasts apart in seconds. Defenders swarmed the survivors, cutting them down with furious cries. The young fighter leapt onto a fallen machine, blasting its operator before raising his rifle high. "We fight as one," he roared. The city itself seemed to awaken. Every street became a trap, every corner an ambush. Humans and defenders struck, together, their voices rising like thunder. The enemy's courage collapsed. Soldiers ran, machines faltered. The once unstoppable tide was breaking. Still, the humans pressed harder. They did not fight for escape or for survival. They fought to end it. Their warship above rained fire where the enemy tried to gather, while their soldiers below cut through the invaders with ruthless precision. The commander fought at Captain Darius's side, his sword flashing. Between breaths, he asked, "Why now? Why did you come now and not before?" Darius's voice was calm, though his rifle burned with fury. "Because humans come when the enemy believes they have already won. That is when our howl is the loudest." The commander smiled grimly. "Then let them hear it until the stars themselves tremble." And tremble they did. The sky lit with the flames of retreating enemy ships. The ground shook with the collapse of their machines. The once proud invaders screamed in fear as they fled, hunted by both human wrath and defender courage. In the middle of battle, the boy found himself fighting beside a human soldier. They exchanged a quick glance. Two different worlds, one purpose. Without words, they fought together, covering each other, striking as one. And in that moment, something greater was born. Not just survival, not just victory, but unity. The tide had turned, and it was no longer just about saving one city. It was about sending a message to the galaxy itself. Humanity had returned, and they did not fight alone. When the last of the enemy forces broke and ran into the night, the defenders filled the air with their cries. They raised their weapons, their voices echoing across the ruins, and above them the human warship's engines howled one more time, not in anger, but in triumph. The commander raised his sword high, shouting into the heavens, "This day will be remembered, not for the fear of the enemy, but for the fury of humanity, and the unity of all who stand with them." The boy fell to his knees, tears streaming, his heart burning with pride. For the first time, he did not feel like a survivor. He felt like part of something far greater. The tide had turned and the war had only begun. Echoes of hope. The battlefield was silent at last. The fires still burned, the ruins still smoked, but the screams of the enemy were gone. What remained was a broken city, scarred, battered, but alive. The defenders stood among the wreckage, too tired to cheer, too stunned to speak. They looked at each other as if to ask, did this truly happen? Did we survive? Above them, the human warship hovered like a dark star, its engines still glowing faintly. The sight alone was enough to steal breath from every chest. It was not just a machine. It was a symbol. The commander, his silver skin streaked with blood and ash, climbed the ruined wall and looked up at the ship. His voice was hoarse, but it carried. They came when no one else dared. They came when all hope was lost. Remember this day, for it will echo beyond our lifetimes. The young fighter kneeling among the rubble whispered softly. It feels like a dream. No, the commander said. It feels like history. Then, the comms came alive one last time. A human voice filled the city, calm, strong, final. You are not forgotten. Humanity watches the void. When the darkness comes, again listen for the howl, we will answer. The defenders froze, their hearts pounding. Tears filled eyes that had seen too much death. That promise was more powerful than any weapon. The boy pressed his hand to his chest, as if holding the words inside himself. We will answer. And then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the warship began to move. Slowly, silently, it rose higher into the black sky. Its engines pulsed, sending waves of sound across the ruins, one last howl, long and deep, that shook stone and soul alike. The defenders reached out their hands as if to hold on to the ship, but it did not stay. It vanished into the void, swallowed by the stars. Gone. Only silence remained. But this silence was not empty. It was heavy with meaning, filled with the memory of fire and fury. It was a silence that whispered, they were here. They will come again. The boy stood, wiping dirt from his face. He looked at the commander with wide, burning eyes. They saved us. But why did they leave so quickly? The commander placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. His gaze remained fixed on the stars. Because humans are not guardians who sit and watch. They are storms that arrive when the world needs them most. They come, they strike, and then they vanish, leaving only echoes. The boy frowned. Echoes? Yes, the commander said. Stories, warnings, hope. The kind of echoes that ripple across galaxies. Today, the enemy will tell their soldiers of the howl that tore the void. And tomorrow other worlds will listen for it, praying it comes for them too. The boy smiled faintly, his eyes shining. Then maybe one day, we'll fight beside them again. The commander nodded. If we are strong enough to endure until then. As the sun finally broke through the smoke, its light fell across the broken city. Survivors climbed out of the rubble, holding each other, weeping and cheering. Children pointed at the empty sky, laughing, imitating the sound of engines with their small voices. For the first time in weeks, the city was not filled with fear. It was filled with life. The defenders rebuilt their walls with trembling hands. They carried their wounded, buried their dead, and sang old songs of survival. But woven into those songs now was something new, a promise of humanity. The boy, sitting alone on the rubble, whispered to himself, when the dark comes again, we will wait. We will wait for the howl. And in the quiet of his heart, he believed. Beyond the stars in the endless black, the warship traveled. Silent, watchful. Its engines were cold now, but its fury waited, locked within steel and fire. Humanity did not linger in victory. Humanity moved forward, always searching for the next cry for help, the next enemy to break, the next void to fill with their terrible song. They left behind no banners, no monuments, no trace but the ruins of their enemies. And yet, what they left was far more powerful. They left a story of how, when hope was gone and death was certain, a single howl from the void changed everything, and that story would echo across the galaxy. For in the darkest nights, when fear crept into the hearts of the weak, they would remember. Humanity comes when no one else dares. Humanity comes with fire and steel. Humanity comes howling,